Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and if you want to learn soft body dynamics, you came to the right place. Let's go learn. So this is what we are going to be creating today. We got some soft body spheres here kind of rolling around, tumbling around, and it's all boxed up in a little boxy kind of shape. So basically this is going to be a crash course into soft body dynamics in Cinema 4D, and to really get you guys thinking about how you could use soft body dynamics in your workflow. So let's just start a whole new scene here, and let's create a square composition because we're gonna have all of our little sphere guys rolling around in a spherical or a rectangular shape. So let's do like 800 by 800 is good, and we'll render all frames, and 90 frames should be good. And we'll just do geometry, all this good stuff. And I think all this stuff is actually fine. So we can start getting to work here. So the first thing I want to do is set up a camera. And let's look through it. And let's just kind of frame up where our scene is going to be. So let's just zero out the angle, zero out the X and Y. So now we're looking straight, dead on. And now we can create some spheres. And we're just going to make a few spheres here, just different sizes. The key is we do not want them to be touching each other, because when they're touching each other and we apply soft body dynamics to it, they're going to freak out and try to blend into one another. So we don't want any intersecting polygons or anything like that. And actually what I should do first before I start positioning all these spheres around is making our boxy shape that we want to have our spheres constrained inside. So despite all the rage, they are still just some spheres in a box. And I just got to throw in some like 90s alternative music joke in there. So here is our cube. This is what is going to be our collider body. Right, and what I want to do is actually just turn on X-ray so we can actually see inside here. And so we have a composition that is 800 by 800, but so we can actually do, let's do like 650 by 650, so everything's kind of in there, something like that. And let's see, let's go 250, let's go 300 for the depth. We'll go 350, and now we can start moving around these spheres to make sure they are constrained inside this box. So we'll just move these around and create some more spheres. Make some small ones, make some big ones. We just want enough in here that we can have them all smushed together. So let's just let's make a few more here. Make this one bigger. And again, we don't want, so just like we don't want our spheres to intersect, we also don't want the spheres to intersect that, that box or the cube that's going to be the collider body. So we can actually just move this and then move this back. Move the camera back just so we can have constraint in here. Let's actually go into our project settings here. And view settings, I think it is, and let's just crank up that tinted border so we can actually see where our boundaries are when we actually render. So we just want to make sure that our collider is going to fit right in that little render region there. So that's looking good. And let's see, let's move this around and move our spheres. And let's see, we got 8 spheres so far. Let's make a couple more. Move one up here. And we're just kind of filling out the volume of the box here. We can make this probably a little bigger. Let's just add one more. Right there. And I think we got 10 total now. Let's see. Yep, or 11. Okay, that works. 11 is fine. And so now let's just make sure that all of our spheres are inside our box. And let's also kind of get out of our camera view. Whoop, and just kind of orbit around here and make sure none of our spheres are touching. So that sphere right there is touching a little bit. Let's see. No touching there. No touching allowed. No touching. And we'll make this a little smaller. And I think we're all set. Let's see. I think this sphere is a little too close to our box boundary. So this guy needs to keep his sphere to himself. And I think we're all set there. So let's go back to our right view. And whoops. Accidentally was moving my camera around. So let's just zero out all this stuff again. There we go. And just zoom, do a little zoomy in. There we go. And let's just turn off the visibility here on our cube. And let's go ahead and set up our dynamic tags here. Let me just move this sphere right about there too. Just we'll make a little baby sphere there. Okay. I think everything's cool. All right. So for dynamics, we need to make sure we set which object's going to be our collider object, wherever our object's going to bounce into, and that is our cube. So we're just going to right click on our cube, go to simulation tags, and just go to collider body. And I think we're all set here except for one thing, in which I'll show you really quick. So these are going to be our soft body dynamic guys. So what we're going to do is just add some soft bodies to that, and let's just hit play and see what happens. And you're going to see automatically that whole bunch of crazy stuff starts happening here. And the reason for that is that by default on our dynamics tag here, we have a shape set to automatic. And even on our soft body dynamic tags here, the shape is set to automatic. And what that tries to do is tries to make the fastest calculation of your object. So in our case of our cube, it's going to try to just simplify the object's geometry so that the dynamic simulation happens fast. But the thing with that is that it does not recognize that this cube is hollow inside. So that's why we're having this issue. It's treating it as it's a solid cube, which it is, but we actually want to use the inside of the actual volume of the cube for our simulation. So what we need to do is change the shape to something else that actually recognizes the actual inside volume of our shape. So the thing that we're going to use is static mesh, and that's kind of the most accurate form of dynamics shape that you can use for a non-moving object. So if we had a moving object, we want moving mesh, but since this is a static collider object, we're just going to use static mesh, and let's see if that works. So now we actually have our spheres inside, and everything's just kind of melting to the bottom of our cube, which is fine. We have soft body dynamics. Because we added the soft body dynamics, our soft body is actually set to on instead of off, made of polygons and lines, and we can start messing around with all of these objects here. So the first thing I want to cover is like the springs here, and that basically controls all of our soft body dynamic shape. So structural is this number kind of controls how many springs, like little tiny springs on each little polygon here. Let's actually go to our shading with the lines here so we can see all of our shapes. And actually the first thing we want to do is, you can see with the deformation and with the spheres, the sphere type that we have, which is standard, we have a lot of polygon density at the top and the bottom of our spheres, and our soft body dynamic simulation is kind of weird. Especially you can see right at the top of this sphere we have a lot of polygon density here, and it kind of makes the soft body dynamics look kind of bad. So we actually want a different type of sphere that it has more polygons that are more evenly distributed across our spheres. So there's hexahedron, which you can see we actually stay with the square polygons here. But we have a little pinching at some of the sides here, as far as like we have some polygons that are bigger than others. So you could use that one, but from what I understand is that the icosahedron, I think I'm saying that right, is more of a evenly distributed polygon type of thing. But they're triangles, they're little tris, so that's the only thing that is kind of weird. But you can see how these polygons, these little triangles, are more evenly distributed. So if we try this simulation again, you should see a lot more of a nicer simulation here with things kind of squashing. We don't have any like geometry pinching where there's a higher density of polygons like we did before. Everything looks pretty good. So we now have everything kind of fallen, right? And these the structural springs here, if I select all of these soft body dynamics tags, the structural basically tries to, this number, the higher it goes, the more these springs are going to be stiffer and try to maintain the structural integrity of the object that you applied the soft body dynamics to. So if I bring this like up to 500 and hit play, you can see that our spheres are a lot more rigid. They're trying to maintain their original shape. Some of these guys are getting a little bit more squished than others here, but you can see the bigger spheres here are trying to maintain their shape. And if we bring this down the other way to say like 35 and let this go, you're going to see this becomes a lot more springy. Everything's getting squished a little bit more. So that's all with the springs. And the shear and the flexion are also help determine how the soft body dynamics works and how those little tiny springs on each of our polygons works. And the shear just prevents shearing, like polygons from shearing one another or folding polygons folding over themselves. And flexion is just it's a fancy word for how flexy how much flex there is with like polygon stretching and stuff like that. So we're actually not going to change any of those any of those settings right there. What we're going to pay attention to is the structural, because that's kind of the most important thing here, is the overall structure, structural integrity. How squishy do we want these guys to be? So that's that. And shape conservation, stiffness is kind of self-explanatory. It just means that your shape is a little bit more stiff. And this guy right here, this pressure, is going to be very important for what we're trying to do in this animation here, because we actually want these spheres to kind of blow up and fill up the space a little bit more, because right now our sphere is a little bit too tiny. So what we're going to do is first I want to not have these spheres just kind of fall to the floor. I'm going to hit Command D and go to my project settings, and we're just going to navigate to our dynamics over here. And we're going to set the gravity to something way lower, to say like 10. Whoops. 10. There we go. And just kind of have these guys more float around in space. So now this looks really nice. We still have a little bit of gravity going on, but we now have these guys floating a little bit more. One other thing to keep in mind is, and I'm not going to mess around with these settings now, but these steps for frame and maximum solver iterations, if we have, once we set up these simulations, if polygons are starting to fly out all over the place, we might need to adjust these settings. And these basically just increase calculation time, but gives you a more accurate soft body dynamics simulation. So we'll come back to this if we need it, but I'm just going to leave that alone for now because I want to make this a very light render, light calculation. All right, so we adjusted our gravity. Our guys are just kind of floating around in space. We want to add some like wind or some turbulence into this scene. So what we're going to do is go to Simulate, Particles, and let's just grab, let's not get a rotation. Let's get Simulate, Particles, Turbulence. And what we're going to do is just give a little bit of turbulence to the scene, and that's actually going to react to the soft body dynamics that are applied on our spheres. So let's actually, this is going to be the scale of the noise that's going to be affecting our spheres here. So let's make it like fairly large, like 150. And then for strength, let's do 150 there too and see what this looks like. So now we actually have our spheres kind of colliding into one another because of the turbulence. And this looks fun. So everyone's just kind of bouncing off one another, and looks pretty nice so far. But the one thing I want to do is have these spheres actually fill up the volume of that soft body cube we have here, this cage that they're in. And to do that, remember, for this simulation to work, and I'm actually going to show you just what happens when we actually have a sphere intersecting, some polygons intersecting. You're going to see this like globular kind of thing happen. So that's why it's important that when we start the simulation, none of our spheres are kind of overlapping or anything like that. But we actually need to grow these spheres in size to fill up that volume, right? So for us to do that, what we're going to do is come back to our little pressure thing here. And basically when you apply pressure, if you add pressure to your soft body dynamics, your object is kind of going to blow up like a balloon, which is actually pretty fun. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's put in a pressure of, let's try 100. And what we're going to see is that, well, that's a little bit too much pressure. But you can see that what's happening is that we have our spheres getting inflated and filling up the volume of that collider body, that cube. And you can see that that's a little bit too much pressure here. Under too much pressure. So let's just tamper that down. Let's see if 65 is good. So it's going to inflate our spheres and fill up the volume, and then our turbulence is going to push everything around. And I think that's still a little bit too much. I think this sphere right here is actually a little bit too big. It's taking up too much dang space, so I'll just shrink that guy down. And let's try 50 and see what happens there. So now we have our spheres inflating, and we still have some space in our cube that things still have room to kind of move around and stuff like that. Probably want to maybe leave even more room for these guys to move around because they're kind of restricted. They're not really tumbling over each other like I'd like. So let's do 40. And let's just crank up the turbulence to say like 250. Actually, let's do scale, and actually want to crank up the strength to say like 200. Let's do 225. All right. So now let's see what happens. So we got a little bit more space, we got a little bit more turbulence. Now we're starting to get that nice tumbling. All these spheres are kind of tumbling over each other, and that looks pretty fun. The thing to keep in mind with the pressure is that it relates to, like, the stiffness kind of relates to how much structural springs are in there. So if we bring the structural down to say 20, we're going to get a lot softer spheres here. So now you can start seeing more deformation, and I actually like that a lot more, where we have more distortion, more squishiness, and stuff like that. And the volume conservation is kind of tries to maintain the volume inside of the shape that you're in. And right now we're not really concerned with that, so we're just going to leave that to 0. So I'm thinking this is looking pretty good. The one thing I want to do is let's just give some of these spheres make them even smaller. And now we got a little bit more action going on here. All right, so I'm liking the animation here. I'm liking what's going on. What I want to do now is just group all these things together, all these spheres together. And one thing you could do to speed up the simulation is bring down the segments, if you'd like. But I'm actually gonna crank it up so we can try to get some nice undulation, some more like ripply details in. Let's actually see where our cube is. I think I moved something around here. Oh, I moved my null. Yep, I moved my null. Let's zero out all this. There we go. here we go. Let's just hide our cube again. Okay, now we're back in business. So adding more geometry, we can get a little bit more rippling action, a little bit more detail with our soft body dynamic simulation here. So I'm liking that a lot better. But with that, you're actually going to slow down the simulation. So it's a nice delicate balance that you have here. Let's actually just bring the pressure down to like 35. So it's a nice delicate balance. But what we can do to actually smooth out our spheres even more, what I want to do is when it comes to rendering, we want to actually turn off the render perfect because that doesn't really play well with soft body dynamics and we'll have render issues. But what we'll do to kind of soften everything, we'll just rename this null sphere null. And then we'll just apply a subdivision surface by just throwing these spheres, that sphere null in the subdivision surface. And you can see that that kind of softens everything up. Everything's really, really nice. You can see we have a little bit of the wrinkling going on at the surface level here. And the nice thing about this is that we have the soft body dynamics applying the dynamics to our spheres and just keeping in mind the segments that are set here. We're actually introducing more segments after the dynamic simulation. So this isn't really going to slow it down because we're applying the subdivision surface subdivisions after the dynamic calculation. So that's trying to just make our simulation as fast as possible. So you can see what's going on here. And let's actually go back into our garage shading. And you can see this guy really getting crunched in there, really getting crunched. So let's give that guy a break. Let's give that little sphere a break. I think it was that guy right there. Let's go in here. Let's find where's my sphere that I want? I want that one. There we go. And we'll just move this over a little bit so that one sphere doesn't get so crushed. And one thing we could actually do so they don't get so crushed is to, again, crank up the structural a little bit, so maybe 30. So that, again, that's going to maintain the structural integrity of our spheres. So playing around the pressure and the structural, it's a little give and take kind of thing. But you can see we have some really nice rippling. So these look almost like, I don't know, like some kind of weird, like blobby. I want to say like water floating around in like zero gravity or something like that. But it looks really nice. So I'm really liking how this is moving, how this is going. Let's actually, you know, apply some textures and stuff like this. And let's actually save this. Save this soft body. There we go. And let's apply a texture. And I'm just going to apply it to that. No, I'm going to apply this texture to everything. And let's just make this like a plasticky or like a matte plastic black. So we'll go in here, make this a little black. As far as the reflectance, I'm going to go ahead and add a Beckman reflection. Make that add. Make this additive as well. And what I want to do is get rid of the specular strength there. And I just want a tiny, tiny bit of reflection and then a little bit of roughness as well. So you can see that this is kind of like a nice matte, almost vinyl texture going on. So we're going to do that. And we also need something to actually reflect in this scene so we can actually see a little bit of stuff. So we can do one thing, and that is to add a light. And I'm just going to add an infinite light and just kind of control where that light's coming from. So like the top left here looks good. And I don't know if shadows are really going to show up, but we can add shadows here. And then let's go ahead and just add the Grayscale Gorilla HDR Studio rig. And let's open up the browser and choose like a bevel reflection studio there. Let's see what that looks like. We'll render that out. And you can see we have the nice blurry reflection, and it's just very subtle, but adds a lot of nice features here. So this looks a little bit more plasticky than like really super shiny. And we can actually go into our reflectance, and that's only a reflectance strength of 3. So we actually can go all the way down to 1 and just get a really, really subtle kind of reflection going on. Maybe a little bit too subtle. Maybe a little bit too much. Too subtle. Okay, so we'll do that. And let's crank up the brightness. Let's crank up the reflectance strength a little bit there. See what this looks like. So we're getting nice reflection from the HDRI Studio. So we can still see that shape there. We got a nice background that's also introduced with the HDRI Studio rig. We don't need the floor, so we're going to turn off that floor. And this is looking pretty good. I'm liking how this is looking so far, if this will actually render. There we go. So the one thing I want to do is just go in and just do physical render here, and let's just do automatic. And something we'll have to worry about later on is the blurriness that we introduced in the texture. We might have to bring up the blurry subdivision there, but we'll forget about that for now. So we got our really nice spheres, little blobby spheres, little oil blobs, whatever you want to call them. And we have our dynamic simulation, right? The one thing I want to do is, it would be nice if we could skip this part where everything inflates. Because right off the get-go, everything inflates and then starts moving around. So there's one thing we could do is just render this out, and let me just bring down the segments here. We could render this out and just chop off the first few frames until they're fully deflated or inflated, and then just render from there. So we don't start from that position. But what we could do, and this is kind of handy when you want to try to loop dynamics, including soft body dynamics, is going into all of your soft body dynamics tags and say, okay, I want to start from this soft body state right here. I like how this looks. I want it to actually start from here. So we can do that by just setting set initial state, and that kind of did something a little bit there and just pop back. So now that's going to store that dynamic state, all of our deformation, our soft body deformation on our spheres. It's going to store that. And when we actually start from the beginning, sometimes you have to like go to the beginning, hit this button, go to back to 0, to go to the start animation a few times, and you'll see, hey, at frame 0, we're actually starting from that stored dynamic state. So that's very handy. We actually don't have that then pressure thing, and actually it's just a little glitched there. So you still have to, when we do this, when we render this out, just because of some little glitch there at the start, we'll have to like edit that out and probably still render from frame 5, but at least we're now rendering from that fully inflated state from our soft body dynamics pressure, right? So if we actually want to try to loop this, right, we got our spheres rolling around, having a good old time. What we can now do is say, okay, at frame 50, I want this to begin to go back to its original state, and all the spheres and stuff go back to its original position, how it looked on frame 0 where we set that initial state. What we can do is set a keyframe to turn off dynamics. So I'm going to go to frame 51, set another keyframe, turn off dynamics, right? And what's going to happen is, to get the objects to transition with dynamics still enabled back to its original position, we need to turn on this dynamic transition. And what's going to happen is our objects are going to still bump into each other, but it's going to try to get back to that original state that we set. And my camera just zoomed out really crazy, y'all. And then we also have this transition time, which basically defines how long, how many frames should that transition, that dynamic transition where our spheres kind of undulate and try to get back to the original position that these spheres were at frame 0. And right now that's set to 60 frames. So right now we're at frame 51. Let's just have the transition last about 40 frames, or actually 39, so that'll bring us to frame 39, or to frame 90 here. And now we can hit play. And so we got a little glitchy thing there. I'm not sure what's going on, but we'll probably have to render from frame 3 or just edit that out. in post, fix it in post. And we have our undulation happening. We got our nice soft body dynamics. We got our cube bouncing, having our spheres kind of collide into them with our soft body dynamics, or with our dynamic collider tag here. Soft body dynamics are doing its thing, and we're going to hit to frame 50 where our dynamics will turn off. So there we go, and it's another glitch, so we're going to have to edit that out as well. But now begins the transition, the dynamic transition back to our original state, back to how our spheres and how our soft body deformations looked at frame 0. So as this goes to frame 90, remember this is a 39 frame transition, so it's going to take a full 39 frames for all those spheres to dynamically try to get back to those initial states that they were set at frame 0. And we're going, and we're going, and you can see the nice rippling action going on there because of our cranked up subdivisions on our sphere. We got the nice smoothing from our subdivision surface. Everything looking really nice, really nice. And then we're almost done. We're almost back. You can do it. You can do it, spheres. Make it back. Make it back. And there you go. So actually, that was just so quick that let's just do a RAM preview here. All right, so we're gonna go do a full RAM preview. Let's do 600 by 600. And yeah, that looks good. And we'll just hit OK. All right, so our RAM preview is done. Let's see what we got. So we got our loopy little action going on here. We got our blobbies going. And you can see that loops pretty seamlessly, except for a little weirdness right about here. And I've discovered that with the dynamic transition and soft body dynamics, it's a little buggy, and we might have to edit out a few frames. So it looks like frame 88 is fine, so we can just edit out from there. And then the beginning looks good. That's our set from initial initial state status right there. So we'll just hit play from there. We have our dynamic transition happen at 51 frames, so that's when everything starts to go back to its original position. You can see that it's a pretty seamless loop. We just have a little bit of glitching, but again, we can edit out some of that stuff, maybe edit out that first frame, see if that's a little bit more seamless. But that's basically how you can loop dynamics, including soft body. So what did we do? We made some spheres that we applied some soft body dynamics to. We went through all the soft body dynamics settings here to get this nice little blobby type of setup here. We also discussed what set initial state does, especially when using soft bodies and the pressure field here to inflate our spheres, and then also how to loop it using to loop dynamics using set initial state, and then the dynamic transition and the transition time. All right, so we covered a bunch here. We covered how to do soft body dynamics, a few of the settings in there. We even learned how to loop the dang thing and make our little blobby things kind of move around and then loop that. So if you guys make anything with this, definitely let me know. I'd love to see what you guys make. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that I covered in this tutorial, make sure to leave a comment in the comments section. And if you like this tutorial, be sure to punch the little likey button. Give me some hearts. I'd really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you watching this tutorial. And I think that's it. I'll see you in the next one. All right, guys? Bye, everybody.